Hey everybody, I'm Tasha from Tasha Quilts, and today we are going to applique a quilt block on the back of a sweatshirt. I'm using my favorite applique method that I actually used in this quilt bunny for my daughter. So what are you going to need today? You're going to need a sweatshirt or a piece of clothing that you want to attach a quilt block to. You're going to need a quilt block. You're going to need some iron-on adhesive and your standard sewing supplies. So our first step is going to be planning. You're going to find the piece of clothing, or it doesn't even have to be clothing. It could be a tote bag, a book bag, a pillow, whatever you want to applique this onto. So first up, you need to find the sweatshirt that you're going to use, and then you need to figure out where you want to place the block. So in my case, I had this black sweatshirt and I knew I wanted to put a quilt block on the back. I used a ruler to help me decide how big I wanted the block. I have a 12-inch ruler, and when I placed it on the back, that looked perfect to me. So just so you can orient yourself, this is a 3X hoodie, and I am using a 12.5-inch ruler, 12-inch finished, 12.5-inch unfinished. This looked perfect to me. But depending on where you're putting the hoodie, what size your hoodie is, and the look you're going for, these variables could all be different and will be different, and you are the only one that can make that decision for yourself. When you're trying to visualize this, you can use rulers. If you don't have a ruler, feel free to use orphan quilt blocks that you have laying around. Different cuts of fabric. I would even just use a piece of paper, to be honest with you. I would take a piece of paper, try to figure out what size I want it to be, and then measure the piece of paper once you have the paper the way you like it. So once I decided on the size of the quilt block, I went to work trying to find what type of quilt block I wanted to make. I went to my favorite software, which is this Block Base Plus software, and I found this windflower block. If you're interested in this windflower block, you can use my free 3-inch half circle templates. That's a tongue twister. And if you go to my website, I'll put the link right here, tashaquilts.com/windflower. I will show you all the cutting instructions on how to make this block. But for the purposes of this lesson, we're just taking a quilt block and we're moving forward and moving to how we're going to applique it to our sweatshirt. Next, you're going to prepare your sweatshirt. So for me, if you look on this, you can see that this is a well-loved, well-used sweatshirt. You can even see that there's some dog hair on there. I simply took a lint roller and got it cleaned up and ready to go. If this is something new that you've never worn, I would really recommend washing and drying it first, simply because you're going to spend a lot of time placing this quilt block in the location that you want it to be in. And if the shirt shrinks or whatever in the wash, it could change the placement of that. So I think that having a washed and dried sweatshirt is probably the best, but I'm not an expert on that, but that is what I think. Next up, you got to make some decisions. You're going to need to decide, do you want this to be raw edge or a finished edge? And do you want to stitch around the outside, or do you want to just adhere it and be done? These decisions are going to impact the type of adhesive you're going to use. So if you decide you want to stitch around the outside like I did, you're going to want to use a fusible adhesive like Heat and Bond Purple, Heat and Bond Light, or Steam-A-Seam. And if you don't, you want to use the red Heat and Bond, which is ultra, meaning red is the color of the package it comes in, and that doesn't require any stitching. Above all, please read the information on the package of the adhesive you buy, because that is obviously the most important thing to follow. For my sweatshirt, originally I thought I was going to go with raw edges because I do like raw edges, and that's what I did in my daughter's quilt. But after seeing it and seeing how much the fabric in this quilt block was fraying, I decided I wanted a finished edge. So next up, you're going to prepare your quilt block. If you decided to go raw edge, you're done. But for me, I wanted to do that finished edge. So you can see here that I just folded it under about 1/4 of an inch. I wasn't particular. I wasn't meticulous about this. I didn't have a ruler making sure that I was doing a consistent 1/4 inch, but I just folded it under, pressed it, and then I clipped it just to keep everything nice and secure. So we have our sweatshirt, we have our quilt block that we've decided we want to use, and we have it prepared in a way that we're happy, either raw edged or folded under. So now it's time to use our Heat and Bond. First, I want to explain what our Heat and Bond or iron-on adhesive is. I think of this as double-sided tape that is activated with a ruler. When you pull it out of the package, you're going to have one side that's really rough, that's the glue, and then one side that's nice and smooth and feels like paper. That's the paper side. You never want to put your iron on the glue side, okay? That's glue, very sticky glue. So you want to make sure you're always pressing to that paper. If you feel it, you should be able to tell the difference. So I cut out my heat and bond. I used the heat and bond in the purple package, and I cut it out just a smidge smaller than my quilt block. I did this knowing I was going to be zigzagging around the edge. If you're using an ultra hold heat and bond or something that you're not going to sew, you probably want to be very diligent about getting it right to the edge, because that's what's going to be holding your quilt block in place. So once you have it cut, it's time to adhere this heat and bond or whatever fusible you're using. I'm just going to say heat and bond from here on out to your quilt block. Now, you want to make sure, one, like I said, that you're using the paper side and it goes down onto just your quilt block, and two, that you have no overhang. So if you have your quilt block and then it has a little bit of overhang, that overhang is going to activate that glue, and it's going to stick to your ironing surface. So make sure that the heat and bond is covering just your quilt block, and then make sure you're pressing and not ironing. Do as I say, not as I do, to adhere the heat and bond to your quilt block. And I'll say it again, make sure you're using the directions on the heat and bond to make sure your iron is at the right heat level and you're pressing for the right amount of time. Once this cools a little bit down, you're gonna peel off the paper, and it should be leaving behind something shiny. That something shiny is the glue. That's our double-sided tape. That's our whole goal. So carefully peel that up. If by chance you're seeing that glue come with the paper, put the paper back down, press, press, press. Okay, you didn't do it right. Go back and get it to attach. Don't worry, it's fine. It'll work. Just go back and finish ironing it. Okay, so now we have a quilt block that's got glue on the back, and we need to figure out our exact placement of where we're going to put this on our sweatshirt. So this glue will not activate again until it hits the heat again. So you're free to put this on your quilt block or put this on your sweatshirt, move it around, and decide where you want it to place it. You should use a measuring tape and measure, like from armpit to armpit, or from the top to the bottom, or from the neck down, and kind of decide where you want this to be. This is up to you and your personal preference of where you want this to be. And I wanted mine far enough down where if the hood was down, you could still see it and somewhat centered. So after using my measuring tape and trying to figure out if I was pleased with it, I used 4 pins, one on the top, bottom, and each side. And I gently pinned that through just the back layer so that I could try the sweatshirt on. I then asked my 4-year-old to take a picture of me, and it did not go well. Here he is. But if you have a friend, or ultimately what I did is I propped my phone up and then recorded a little video so that I could see myself wearing it pinned and see if I liked it. All right, so now you're happy with your placement. You're gonna put your sweatshirt back onto your ironing board or your wool pressing pad. You have the block right where you want it. You're going to press again in accordance with the instructions on the heat and bond. And voila, you should have a quilt block that is stuck to your sweatshirt or whatever it is that you're adhering it to. So next up, we're going to use the zigzag stitch on our machine, or you can use whatever stitch you want in your machine. This is a great time to pull out that book and look at all your different options. On my last machine, I had a stitch that looked just like a baseball, like the stitching on a baseball. I'm sure this one probably has it too, but I was really in the mood for a zigzag, so I just went right for the zigzag. I knew that I wanted a shorter stitch length, meaning that my lines were closer together, and a wider stitch width so that the zigzag would be a little bit further out. So our goal is going to be to zigzag around this with, half the stitch on the block and half the stitch on the sweatshirt. You can also straight stitch, like kind of top stitch if you want. Really, the choice is yours. You just want to stitch through this and make sure the edges of the quilt block are down. If you decide to do a zigzag or whatever stitch you decide to do, I would really recommend using a piece of scrap fabric to test out all the stitches and the settings to make sure you're happy with it before you start on your sweatshirt. If you're doing a zigzag and you get to a corner, my preference is to pivot the corner when the needle is down in the corner of the block. So I would pick up the presser foot, rotate down, put the presser foot back down, and continue on. This is something else that you can practice with your scrap fabric. Okay, so here's a picture of the sweatshirt freshly stitched before the washing machine. And then here's a picture after it's been washed. And here's a picture of it after it's been washed and dried. I put it in the washing machine and in the dryer. You can see that the adhesive gives it a little bit of a stiff look, but I'm okay with that. I like it. This is simple. I'm absolutely thrilled with the way this looks, but I just want to draw your attention to that. Will you give this a try? Will you use this method? Will you use a different method? Let me know below. And I will also update my website, tashaquilts.com/applique-sweatshirt with any other tips and tricks. And I will also list all of the specific tools I used and links to things if you want to see the exact heat and bond I used, the exact sweatshirt I bought off Amazon. I can give you the links to all of that stuff on that website as well. If you made it this far and you enjoyed this video, please make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, all the places. Wherever you are, follow me there. I'm Tasha Quilts. I hope you find some time for yourself. Take care of yourself. I'll talk to you soon. Okay, bye.